Item
No,
number 13.
Was his mother?
No, my brother's mother-in-law.
But I was just saying we are joined at the hip.
No, they've got their own flag, but they're still a part of the realm. Yeah. And they voted to stay with the realm.
There's a lot of pressure on them.
Welcome team. So we will
I nearly went
we'll
there,
get
I must
into
say,
this. Councillors, if we can just
I'd love
make
to
a
go.
start. Particularly, we'll come back to the two of you. You seem to have been doing the yeoman's work today. So, right, quickly outline for us what the issues are around this site.
So what we have here is that the Tāmaki Regeneration Company is proposing to invest in council at no cost, 1,795 square metre park. I think the report highlights some of the issues around that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. And the key thing in here is the local board agreeing to pay the LDI and us looking at, do we stick with or accepting things that fit the parks network, or are we persuaded by an LDI agreement with the local board? The mayor's not here. When I discussed this with the mayor, he may arrive and raise this, but we did wonder if there was the ability, if we did accept this piece of land, that if the local board decided that they didn't want to pay LDI anymore, if we could sell it.
Yep.
Is that, can that be done? I'll let you mull, and maybe we'll take some questions. We'll go Councillor Lee and Simpson and Quacks and Watson.
So just questions at this point, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yep. So can you, I'm not sure it reflects it in the report, but there was an original proposal, an original design that the local board didn't feel was, let's just say, safe for a playground context. And then TRC went back to the drawing board and then came up with something that both the local board and you, in terms of a parks perspective, feels does meet standards from a safety perspective.
Through the chair, this is just a decision on the land. A decision on playground location would be made by the local board at a different meeting. So there haven't been those discussions, as I understand, about safety. What was discussed was that the original proposal was surrounded by roads on all sides, and TRC have come back and removed one of those roads, so it is a little bit better from a design aspect.
Okay.
And this, through the chair, and the size of the parcel of land has grown.
Right. So there was the original proposal, it's been amended. The local board's comfortable with the proposal as it stands, and this is about land, our decision today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the local board know what it's getting itself in for? In other words, does it know in the next 10 years what the OPEX will be? Yeah. I know you've got in the report that it's $1,000 mowing and sweeping and whatever, but that's got to, obviously would increase over the 10 years. So I just I'm surprised the local board isn't here, to be honest, but I just want to be sure that in agreeing and requesting that the governing body actually let us acquire the land for free, and on the assumption that they will pay for the OPEX, that they really know clearly what the OPEX is. And if that's the case, why wasn't in the recommendation there an option for that OPEX to be built in, as we have done in, Councillor Filipaina, remind me, was it Rodney?
It was the Rodney one, and I think it was in the, sorry, through you, Chair, sorry. Apologies. But it was a Rodney local board that ended up accepting the maintenance through the LDI, and I think it was part of, well, there's two of them, but I'm just saying that the Rodney local board with the piece of land that you're referring to, that they picked it up through their budget.
Both, Rodney?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kat,
the other one,
do you want
yeah.
to?
I'll just clarify on that. This committee made a decision on 2 acquisitions. One was in Papakura and one was in Rodney, that both those local boards could have low priority land at no cost if they agreed to pay it through their LDI. So Rodney has not made a decision, and Papakura said no, and you subsequently then said we will not be acquiring the land.
Yep.
This proposal kind of came in after that decision, but before the Papakura decision. So we had tried to stop the loop of committee to committee and asked the local board straight up, would you like to contribute LDI, because this is what the decision this committee's made. So they had full information about the costs, and so we can only assume that they understood what that meant when they made the decision.
Never assume, but
Wow.
if you feel confident that they have made the decision based on all the information, then, yeah, I know where I sit on this matter then, thank you.
So to answer that, we felt confident
Right,
that they had
okay.
debated it, because they had neither or.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Councillor Quiggs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The OPEX side of it seems very reasonable on this, but, you know, I would fall on the side of actually A on this, simply because this area here is now a huge redevelopment going on there, and the old state houses from the 1950s that were put there in the 1950s are being removed. They have big sections and now being replaced by a much more intensified living environment. So given that, and while we make a comment about there's no shortage of reserve or open space in there around that area, in actual fact, given the intensity of the urban environment there now, there really is a shortage, and I think that for a fairly small OPEX sum and no capex, I think we should probably take that. I would certainly fall on the side of acquiring this piece of land.
I didn't know.
Okay. Councillor Watson.
Just through you, Madam Chairman, I'm just asking Councillor Lee if you're going to move A. Okay, so I'm happy to.
So we were just doing questions.
Yep, so I'm just saying I'm
Councillor Lee's going
happy to
move.
second it, and I've got a few comments, so I'll wait to the comment section.
So,
I'll make some
question, Councillor Clow?
Just to clarify, the Papakura and Rodney ones, sorry, did get in there, did we not purchase them in the end?
So for Papakura, no, you declined the acquisition after the LDI was not committed, and Rodney has not made a decision, and I believe the developer has moved on with their subdivision.
And if the local board does not pick up that the default is we do not pick up that land, is that correct?
Yes.
Similar to Papakura. And then my other follow-up question is, can a local board ever opt out, or can they opt out, and can they ever opt out of a commitment like this?
Yes, they could.
And what would be the circumstances? They just decide 2 years later, really don't want to be funding this anymore, so it's all yours.
It's supplementary then for that. We need to.
Yeah.
It is our belief that, yes, they could do that.
Therefore, as a follow-up to Councillor, the Chair's question earlier, can we then put a caveat that it would get sold?
Yep,
Yes, that's what I was suggesting.
Yes, you could do that.
yeah.
And one more question, sorry. In number 4, executive summary, you make the statement, acquisition would meet a level of public expectation that has been raised. That's almost like a warning sign to say maybe 500 metres away, the local people would like to have a similar sort of little park that you kind of don't think is necessary in the first place.
So the Tāmaki Regeneration Company has been consulting on a range of parks it proposes. So therefore, when these come to you, the public has already been consulted by Tāmaki Regeneration about what they're proposing, and I think they often talk about what kind of playgrounds or development they might undertake on there as well.
Okay, Member Brown.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a bit confused why there's a pendulum swinging on the question of the acquisition insofar as the council's dedicated commitment and opposition to the land transfer occurring from Ngāti Paoa and the Crown, just down the road. So the assumption I made from that exchange was any public space that availed itself in this precinct would be seized upon by the council insofar as reconciling, if it was a loss, the acquisition that potentially is occurring between the Crown and Ngāti Paoa. Council were very clear about wanting to retain and improve its green spaces. So a couple of things here. One, I don't understand why we're on a pendulum. And two, if it was that the pendulum says it's going to acquire it and then sell it, that causes, at least for our community, to begin to question the integrity. Because either you mean the submission applied to the Ngāti Paoa scenario insofar as preserving and improving this space, or we don't. I.e., we're going to get some park or some property and now we're going to flick it. So I think that's an important part that you need to be wary of for our community, because if it was at a secondary space that was going to be flicked, then integrity's in question here around the submission made by council in opposition to Ngāti Paoa.
I'm just not too sure who might be the best person to comment on that. I can see the point you're making, Member Brown. We're sort of conflating two issues that are absolutely linked, but the discussion is being had about half of it. And I guess I'm just searching a little bit as chair without wanting to disrespect the wider debate, the discussion and the pretty contentious process around Ngāti Paoa's land. We probably are looking at this in the context of regionally, we've got a parks network, we've got a very clear idea of where we want to acquire or get bits of land, and this quite simply comes down to, in this area, if we've got a very clear network of parks that we want, and we will be acquiring and working to get them, if this doesn't fit that box, why would we be spending ratepayers' money on managing that as a park when there might be something much better around the corner? So that's simply, you know, there is the very big issue, but we're looking at it in that smaller context.
It's just a difficult one insofar as supporting an acquisition, but you don't actually know whether you're going to keep it or not.
So remembering it's not an acquisition, it's just the developer saying, this is a bit of land I don't want, you can have it.
The gift, sorry.
And we go, okay, but having it also means we need to pay $6,000 a year to look after it. And we're exploring the slightly tough option of going, we don't want to just accept any old raggedy bits of land, thank you very much. But if we think we can make it work, well, maybe we will, but the local board wants it, therefore they can pay the money for the upkeep. If the local boards suddenly go, we don't want this anymore, then we need to look at the option to say, doesn't fit the network, can we then sell it to put towards a better and more appropriate piece of parkland in the area? I mean, I know we're all passionate about getting open space and parkland, but you can gather up a whole bunch of, and we've all got them in our areas and we know what they're like, little bits of grass that get mown month after month and you never see a single person on them because they're simply in the wrong place.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can appreciate what I've got to say. It's going to go all over the place, so that's fine. Thank you.
But I acknowledge the bigger issue that you're raising. Member Wilcox.
Yeah, well, I know, I'm getting a little bit, struggling a little bit with all of this corridor. I thought we made this policy up last term because we were getting pocket parks thrown at us from here to everywhere. So in your report, you say that it's not a high priority. And if it was on the other side, perhaps linking up with Glenbrae or something, I'd kind of say, oh, well, yeah, there's a linkage there, because one of the great things I can remember even as a kid and coming home from school was walking down all these parks. I mean, the college and that, I'm not sure whether the college is still going, but that would be subject to RFR, I take it anyhow. So, I mean, I'm not sure where that fits into this scenario. But being up in the middle there, it kind of just seems like a little bit weird. So I suppose I'll be a bit cutthroat on this. Could we take it and then, as Councillor Clow has suggested, just flog it off?
Bad faith.
And use that money to purchase a block that was closer to Glenbrae?
That's a question the Chief of Operations, Dean, is always asking. I suppose for councillors to consider this, you will be taking today in good faith a piece of land that you're saying to the community that you will provide this as park. And so that is something for you to consider. But council does have a disposals process, and it is a robust process which includes engagement with local boards and having a look at whether it's required or not.
So the step in the middle is take it, board pay LDI money, keep it going. If the board say no longer in our budget, no longer paying, then we can put it on the list of sales. But it would be somewhat disingenuous to take it and flick it. It's just dodgy. To be blunt. Let's try and untangle
And we
this a
should be
bit
quite
more.
clear, Councillor Member Wilcox, I was not proposing the latter. It was the option before that, if it happened.
No, I wasn't suggesting you were.
It's good to explore honest conversation. Councillor Simpson.
Councillor, speak to it, not question you.
Okay. Question, Councillor Hills. Is yours a question?
Well, I sort of am worried about that. We'll just sell it if the local board pulls it. A, I'm not sure they would ever do that. But B, surely there would be a different mechanism where we could, through the LTP, reduce their LDI budget by $6,000 a year, which would mean we were effectively doing the same thing. I'd have concerns that we build a playground, or something happens there, and then suddenly we're just like, boom, see you later. So surely there is a mechanism where we could reduce their LDI as opposed to just selling a park if they decided to.
Couldn't keep up with them.
Okay. I think we're reaching a bit of a landing. It sounds a bit like a, yep, and tie the local board into LDI in perpetuity as far as
I don't know why they
possible.
would pull that money anyway.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. We've done the questions. Councillor Simpson speaking to the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just want to support the fact that the local board has come in behind and not just asked us to accept a gift at a cost, but asked us to accept the gift and take the cost from that gift into their budget. And I think it would be unwise of this council, considering the generosity of that local board and the funding constraints that local boards are under for everything they do, to say no when they're prepared to make that commitment. So I had my question asked around their understanding of the fact that this was in perpetuity, that it would be an amount of money that obviously would be inflationary depending on what that cost was. To protect the finances of this council, I suppose I sort of run with Councillor Hills and say potentially you don't give it to them in the first place. You don't sort of give LDI just to have it taken back. So potentially look at a financial mechanism where it's just in the bank before it's asked back, because there will be political change over time, that happens, and so for me, providing there's that security by financial security, I think it would be just unnecessary for us to say no. The second point I just want to make around it is the fact that it is very close to Point England Reserve. And there has been a number of contentious comments around the fact that some open space, this is a small way that we can make a contribution to increasing that open space back into that region. So to that end, I totally support the recommendations. Thank you.
Okay. So Councillor Lee, you're next, but do you want to close the debate so we can go Clow, Watson, Hills, and then go to you?
Sure.
Okay, good. Councillor Clow.
No, I'm not going to support this acquisition. I've got no comfort from the fact that quite clearly the local board can just flick the responsibility back to us at pretty well any time they want to. And I'm just going to be staunch and stand up for the recommendations of the staff, because this is a consistent message coming through, and they're consistently telling us what they believe is the best thing to do, and we don't need this here and we don't need this here, etc., etc. But I actually want to ask Mr. Kimpton to just repeat something he said in a workshop on Tuesday, or last week I should say, when he was talking about the fact that when it comes to his area, we have enough money in the LTP to deliver all the capital projects for the next 3 years of our long-term plan, but after that, there is no money. There is virtually no money to deliver any more capital projects at this stage of our LTP, so that's 4 years away. Maybe I heard it wrong.
So it's not quite how I recall saying it, but let's find out. So the challenge I put to the workshop, finance performance workshop, is that from a staff perspective, if there's a capital investment in the first 3 years of the LTP, we will do what it takes to deliver that. Recognising that the timing may move around depending on how things go. If it's in the subsequent 3 years, so years 4, 5 and 6, staff have resource to provide an advisory service, but have not got the resource or the budget to do the feasibility studies and or conceptual designs that may arise from a set of projects within that LTP. And if it's in the last 4 years of the LTP, unless there's a specific decision because it's a very large project and needs longer term planning, we'll be waiting to pick that up closer to the time. If it's not in the long-term plan, whether it's a capital project or whether it's a service or a program, then it's not funded. So that's the key principle. We also talked about renewals and maintenance budgets, and in that regard, our view is that with the number of vested assets coming into council, whether they're coming in free, as this one is, or whether they're vested because it's part of a development, that the rate of those assets coming in and the provision for those assets is putting our renewals and maintenance expenditure under a fair bit of stress, and we'll need to review that with you coming into the long-term plan. On this particular issue, then, so how does what I've described play out? On this particular issue, the staff advice to you is we have a policy around acquisition of open space for parks and reserves purposes, and staff have given you advice. This, free or not, this land doesn't fit with that policy, and so that's been put to the local board, and the local board says we still think this adds value to our community for reasons that they will be across. But whether it's free or not, you'll need a capital investment in that site to create the playground and or other improvements to it, and you'll need to provide an ongoing maintenance for both the open space and any improvements. So I think your challenge as council, and I include local boards and governing body or this committee in that, is the degree to which non-priority acquisition of open space, if I can use that language, you want that to consume LDI in local boards, because if it's being spent this way, it's not going to be available for other things. So that's a real discussion that you'll have with local boards at the right time. So I think you just need to be careful as you go into this. If you purchase this now, this is not, my advice to you is you will never end up selling it, okay? If you take this on your books, you won't sell it because you'll have created a whole sense of community commitment to it. So you're putting a caveat around, we will sell it if they stop funding it. I don't think that'll play out politically. I could be wrong, but that would be my advice to you. So you agree to this on the basis that it becomes a permanent part of your portfolio, unless for another reason it's then released. So you're making, on these ones you're making important decisions because you're shifting the OPEX and capital improvements to the local board. And yes, it could come back. It could be a discussion that you have, but you need to go into it with your eyes wide open. That would be my survey of the issues that you need to address when thinking about this decision.
Thank you. That's really clear. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Well, I certainly going into this with my eyes wide open. 1,800 square metres of land for free that the local board want. They want it. They've made it clear they want it. And they've expressed a clear commitment that they're going to pay the whopping cost of $1,000 a year to cut the grass. Now, I dare say anyone else in Auckland, if they came up to you and say, hey, John, here's 1,800 metre square section, but I'll give it to you for nothing, but you're going to have to cut the grass. I might be tempted to take it. I don't mean to be facetious, but I can think of many parts of the lower part of the North Shore where there was a whole lot of rubbish land that the developers didn't take because it was no use to them. It had bush on it, it had streams in them, and they didn't want it, so it was of no value to them. The council, and I think it was the Birkenhead Borough Council to its credit, and Northcote and a few other ones, they took this land, and for decades it just sat there, and no one bothered with the kids like me, went and played it and built tree huts and all the rest of it. But now, in 2017, that land is incredibly valuable. It forms the only green network that goes all through Glenfield and Birkdale and Beachhaven, which were kind of poorer areas. And now you just wouldn't be able to get. Housing has encroached into it a bit. But the point is, the foresight shown by someone way back then has paid off with the council now. And this is an absolute no-brainer. Wherever it happens around Auckland, whether it's in Tamaki or Albany or anywhere else, if the local board's willing to take on that cost, good on them, because they're showing a bit of foresight.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo some of the comments of Councillor Watson. You know, I am very blessed to live in Kaipatiki in Glenfield, and we have over 540 hectares of local parks just in our little local board area. And it was the foresight of people long before that means I can basically walk up and down the road over my back fence everywhere that there's parks. We do have a policy, and I totally agree with that, but I see this as outside that because of the local board's view on that. I would totally go, no, we can't afford it, to purchase it outside the policy, and maybe better things come up in the future. I also know at the same time as this kind of thing's coming up, we've got the governance review happening, and this is the type of thing that local boards, I think, get a bit annoyed about, where they try and go the extra way to alleviate a problem and use their own discretionary funding to fund something. So I think it's important that we respect this, and I also think that, you know, sort of threatening to sell it in the future is not a good look. But I do know if for some bizarre reason, which I doubt would ever happen, that they stop funding the $6,000 a year, that we do have a mechanism as a governing body to then reduce their LDI by $6,000 to make it all meet up. But I do think that it's important that we, you know, it is free land technically, and the local board's willing to fund it. So I think we need to, you know, be creative a little bit on situations like this, and vote for this today. So thank you.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Walker, Councillor Mike Lee, and then Councillor Denise Lee, who will close the debate. Councillor Walker.
So I'd just like to follow on from Councillor Hill's comments around creativity. And I would make the observation, as Councillor Hill's mentioned, that governance is changing. I would hope that we're going to have more authority, accountability, responsibility going further around local boards. I'd suggest that if you are talking about the money, a certain quantum of money a year for looking after an area, local boards are going to be creative around that. You could have a community garden there, and I know of community gardens that cost nothing to run on council's part. Communities want to be empowered. They want to do stuff, and they're actually crying out for space. This might make a good location for a community garden, especially in an area where I would suggest a lot of people are food deprived. Food deprived. The other comment that I'd make is in respect of some land, if that land has got trees on it, has got vegetation on it, you can quantify the value of nature in terms of purifying our air supply, enhancing stormwater, a whole lot of things that other parts of this council attach value to. And increasingly you can quantify those values. And far-reaching councils, and I could elaborate any number of them in cities around this planet, put a value on open space and on the things that nature provides, and play, and all of those things that we've been considering earlier in this agenda. So for me, this is a no-brainer. And I think that the test for me is if I look back at some later point and thought, well, gee, how did I vote around this? I'd be pretty proud of the way I'll be voting on this today for future generations. And that's the test that matters to me. It's that future generation test.
Councillor Lee.
I'll be brief, Madam Chair. Yes, I agree. It's a no-brainer. This is a very sensitive area right now with growing public concerns about the loss of 11 hectares on the Point England Reserve. And at the same time, there is intensive development going on with the Tamaki Redevelopment Company. So open space is at a premium. There are more people and less open space than what there was or will be. And so if there is an opportunity and the local board supports it and it's for free, please, I can't see any reason not to accept it. In many respects, given what is going on there, it would be almost irresponsible not to accept it.
And closing words to Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair Josephine Bartley from the local board is actually away sick today from work. I'm on good assurance from multiple members of the local board that they have thought through the issues and that they, as you read, are supportive of the proposal to accept what they would see and we should see too as a free gift with the understanding that there is the LDI implications and again that the local board have thought through what those implications are. It is an amended design, so I think what a couple of points that councillors may not be privy to, and it was part of the discussions that went on with the local board and with Tamaki Redevelopment Company and our parks team, is that there has been an amendment or several amendments of what was originally proposed, so the local board see what is now before them, and I know that's not what we're voting on today, but the current design is something that's been, they feel, on their terms. And I think that's important to note. The process with Tamaki Redevelopment Company could have been better. A suggestion would be that they engage with our parks team earliest in this particular venture, so I would hope that they would be listening to doing things a little bit differently if we have other pocket parks show up. And the other important point to note, colleagues, is that the local boards see this as contextually in a much wider frame with all the work that they've got ahead of them with the Tamaki Redevelopment Company and land exchanges in general for the area. So the open space network plan hasn't quite gone through the local board agenda. It should be coming soon. So this is one, for want of a better term, this should be seen as a give and take series of discussions, many discussions that they'll be having with TRC. So what we see and read in our agenda is that the local board are comfortable, and so should we too. I'll just point out 3 quick bullet points. One is that if you read paragraph number 6, the staff do in fact recommend that this take place, despite their report saying earlier they didn't. Number 6 clearly does highlight the staff do recommend that we pass this. I guess I already covered open space network plans coming, so there's a much wider view to be cast on this. And then the last point I'd make is, Member Brown, our governing body submission to the Point England enablement legislation actually does not oppose the legislation. We've highlighted some concerns and especially talk about precedent and what to do with the proceeds should things pass, but it doesn't oppose. It was the local board that took that step in their submission. Thank you, Madam Chair. I urge fellow colleagues to pass this. Thanks.
Thank you. Right, so we'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against?
No.
We'll record that.
No.
Yep. Thank you. Don't want it recorded. Point made. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. So we move on to item 14, Maraetai Drive in Maraetai. So we've got item 14, item 15, the 2 revocation items. Welcome, team. Over to you. So, brief, just reminding people about the process, I think, is probably the most important issue. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is following on from the Council's decision to approve the disposal of 2 parcels of land. We're looking at the 2 reports here, one for Maraetai Drive and one for Nighill Crescent. The resolution was passed to dispose of the properties subject to statutory requirements in April last year. We've now carried out part of the revocation process for the reserve status of the land via public notification, and on submissions we've appointed a independent commissioner to review the submissions, and the commissioner has provided us with a recommendation on both properties, a separate recommendation on both properties.
Lovely, thanks, Nigel. So should we just take questions at this stage? Questions? It's pretty straightforward. I think the process is clear.
Move.
You happy to move? Councillor Philippina? Yep. I'll second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. And 15. Same.
I'll leave it to the councillors in Mission Bay to
Okay.
move, Chair.
Just be some questions on that. If not, would you? Oh, Member Brown.
Unlike the Maraetai situation, I understand in the background of the Nihil Crescent property that there is an issue, and I'm unsure whether it's been resolved. So I do know of one, possibly 2 iwi, whom took issue to the potential of removal of vegetation, particularly around the site post what's decided here. I also understand that that issue, at least from them, has not been resolved. I wanted to know if you had an update around that scenario.
So that's the Ngāti Kamaho,
Covenant.
the covenant issue, yeah.
Right. The issue has not been resolved as such, but there are a number of options available for the protection of the trees if that's what the councillors wish to do. 3 options. One would be to nominate the tree for inclusion on the Auckland schedule of notable trees. Another one would be to place a covenant under the 1977 Reserves Act. And the third one would actually be to place a restriction, a covenant, on the title.
and this relates to the two submissions that we had. One was a general comment on the vegetation on the site. The other was noticing that there were a number of native trees on the land. So we did get an arborist's report, which we gave to the commissioner, and he considered the report. The arborist noted that there was just one tree which was of note, but probably wouldn't be up to, would be on the low. If you were going to submit an application under the unitary plan to protect the tree, it would be at the lower end of that scale of notability. But the commissioner didn't make any recommendations as to the protection of the tree on the site. So we're talking about one tree over the whole area of 800, which is covered in bushes and smaller trees and shrubs.
So if I look at the 17 tree removal applications to Waiheke last week alone, and 17 separate properties that all took the same attitude, it's only one tree. But they had no idea that 16 of their neighbours on the same island were proposing a similar application. So with respect to the number, that's irrelevant. What's relevant is the significance placed upon the flora and fauna, albeit by one submitter, that I find myself almost responsible for in the exchanges we're having today. So I accept your answers. Somewhat disappointed that the Commissioner, for whatever reasons, didn't make a comment to it, because that would have been helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So it's still within our hands. Should we decide to pick up from, I think, so Ganti Tiato, Waiho and Ngati Tamaho both made the point about the vegetation and the hope for covenanting of the trees, the same tree, the tree. So we could actually put something in here to say when we go through this process, we'd like that protected.
Yes, that's possible, and if the Minister approves the revocation of the reserve status, then our next step would then be to try and sell the land for and return as much money to council as possible. If we do protect the tree, then that will have an impact on the value that we can release. Potentially, maybe not. I mean, until we go to the adjoining owners and discuss that in more detail, we can't tell.
Okay. All right, let's see where we're going to go with this. I've got Member Wilcox and then Councillor Wayne Walker. Oh, Councillor Filipaina.
So I'm reading through the Commissioner's report, and we have to take what the Commissioner said on face value. I'm concerned in a lot of ways because for Māori, this is the only time that they have in which to discuss the revocation under Section 77 of the Reserves Act. And as far as I know, is there another process for them once it goes to the Minister, or does this recommendation go directly to the Minister?
In the clearance process, iwi mana whenua were consulted on the proposal to dispose of the land subject to statutory requirements, and then in our process under the Reserves Act, we also separately notified all iwi for submissions, and hence the submissions that we received, and we'll submit the council's resolution. If it's a resolution to support the revocation, then we'll submit that resolution to a Minister of Conservation, and the Ministry does do its own check on Maori consultation, iwi consultation, mana whenua consultation, and on one of the properties we've been involved with recently, they actually undertook their own checks also.
So my second question, sorry, Madam Chair, I have a few questions. My second question is, did the Ahika, in other words, Orake, discuss this kaupapa?
The Orake Trust, they indicated that they had no objection to the proposal to revoke the reserve.
Okay. My third question is, and I think this is something that we may not be able to solve in this forum, but the Commissioner makes no mention of that he heard the discussion of Ngati Tamaho and others in this discussion, in his findings. I'm struggling to see that in his findings. Would you reach that same conclusion?
In our report that we sent to the Commissioner, we included the correspondence with the iwi in question. So the Commissioner would have had sight of the correspondence.
And I think the Commissioner went to quite a lot of time to investigate with other parties as well, so I presume I can't comment on how he dealt with the submissions, but we do know he went out and spoke to a number of people, including the members of the local board, to check on the consultation process, etc. So I presume he would have given it due weight.
Well, I'd like to think so, but he doesn't report that he did. So, you know, he's just done a cut and paste of the principles of the treaty, but I don't see there where he addressed the issues that they had raised in that way, following the principles of the treaty. My final question is really to do with the tree itself. You said there's one tree there that the arborist said could be protected as a notable tree. Would it achieve those results?
Well, first, the arborist did not specifically say it was a notable tree. He said that the tree was of some ecological value. The three options that I put forward will place a protection on the tree, but I suppose the question the councillors have to consider, in addition to the potential effect on the value and the saleability of the land, would be how this would be monitored.
So my supplementary to that, Madam Chair, is then, is this tree mentioned in our biodiversity policy strategy?
This individual tree?
No, I mean this species of tree. I mean, is it just another tea tree, or is it just a
It's
a
koe.
So that, I take it that's a rare tree in the central city?
I understand that it is relatively rare, and these are the arborist's words, it is relatively rare in central Auckland.
So does biodiversity add points to the notable trees scenario?
Would be presumably one of the characteristics that would be considered in an application of that nature. Yeah, so it would qualify on the basis of being a relatively rare native tree in central Auckland.
There are a number of metrics that the policy has, and points are scored against certain attributes. So in terms of biodiversity, it would probably score quite highly. In terms of its visibility, for example, it might not score very much.
So we could ask for it to be put on because it is rare, but because it can't be seen, because it's still only, how old is this tree?
The arborist indicated that it was around 50 years old.
So because it's only 50 years old and can't be seen yet, but in 100 years' time it will be seen, we're not going to save it. I mean, I'm just struggling to understand this, Madam Chair.
So I don't think that's what we're saying. So let's just take a little step back. So we just need to understand the process. We need to first of all make the decision on the revocation or not, to support the revocation or not. Secondly, just understand if this is, it then goes through the separate process that may well pick up some of the issues raised by iwi and may well pick up the tree protection issues. Thirdly, if it slips through that, when this is put up for sale and consents are applied for again, I would presume that the bush cover, or no, if there's not an SCA, then it might not trigger a more closer look at the bush. So I guess what we're saying is, you know, do we trust the gates that it's going to go through, or do we wish to place some sort of covenanting and protection on the tree today? Do we have another opportunity if we don't do it today? What are the other opportunities to us?
The other opportunity could be after, if we do request the lifting the reserve status and the Minister approves, then we could then review the protection of the tree, and we are also considering a plan change for the open, because it's not required for open space any longer. So in terms of selling the property, it's better to have an adjacent zoning, or the same zoning as the adjacent property in terms of maximising value to council. And so I suppose in that plan change process, that could be considered as part of the attributes of the site.
My preference as chair is that we actually do it in the right context. I understand the issues that are being made, but I don't like making decisions without the information to back it up, and we're guessing the age, the importance, the whatever information we need about the tree is not here. And I've seen a lot around this table. We do a lot of that, and I'd rather we did it in the context of good information and the right report in front of us. So I'm going to suggest that to progress this, that we accept the recommendation here, and we have a B which asks that we pick up the issue of the protection, the appropriate level of protection for, is it the tree or the bush? What are we talking about? I think should we go for the
tree.
The tree. The appropriate level of protection for the tree as we go into the, whatever you just said, Nigel, which is the next stage, the...
It would be a plan change on the zoning of the property.
Madam Chair.
Just hang on a sec. Okay.
Oh, you've got it.
I just heard a Madam Chair from here. Councillor Filipaina?
Chair, as Meatloaf would say, you took the words right out of my mouth, because that's exactly what I was waiting for, really, from the Independent Māori Statutory Board members, to put something very similar to what you've suggested. So thank you for B, because I will support B. And the reasons as outlined in the three options, those three options will be coming to us as a result of your B. So, yeah, look, I'm definitely supported. I don't know if Chair, you will be moving the recommendation, but I have no issues in regards to either or wait for an Independent Māori Statutory Board member to either second or move. But look, I think it is important, based on the Māori impact statement and what we've heard from our staff in regards to the revocation, but also to the fauna. So, yeah, I definitely support A and B, Chair.
Okay. Well, if you're happy to move, I'll second.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, first off, just want to speak in support of the tree. Koikoe trees are very special. Something of this age has got considerable merit. So I don't want to say anything more than that, but it's a special tree. The bolt-on, I'd suggest. The other important thing about this site is the flooding, and in particular the overland flow path. So it would concern me that we would lose that, because that would affect residents around the area and council stormwater management at large. Is it possible to bolt that on, Madam Chair?
As soon as we get into looking at any change and operate or use of this site, all of that will be taken into consideration. I think we could rewrite the whole plan change process here. All of that's taken as given.
Disposals.
We're just wanting to pick up the issues raised by iwi in particular, so that we don't lose the issue of the tree. But all the rest is taken as given. Am I correct? Okay, Councillor Mike Lee.
I'll be brief, Madam Chair. I strongly oppose this on fundamental principles. With a growing population, we should be creating more open space, not developing it. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just got a question around the tree, and I have no worries at all about keeping the tree. In fact, I have no worries about keeping more than one tree. But the point is, if you have a look at page 98, it's a very thin strip of land. And so it's very unlikely to sort of get extra housing on it. Well, you never know these days, they're getting smaller and smaller, aren't they? But in the sprawling metropolis of Mission Bay, I'm just not sure. So I'm wondering about the value of doing this in the first place. If the tree is not located on the map, I can't see where it is, and I just wonder about the value of doing it in the first place. If you've got the tree protected, what does that do to the value of the land, which was the whole purpose of getting rid of it, so we could get some money and going forward. So,
Through the chair, yes, the characteristics of the land are steep and narrow. There could be value released from amalgamation with the adjoining ownerships. And I note that the lot 1 was sold at over $500,000 last year, similar, same width and similar length. So we can release quite a lot of value from these for adjoining owners in terms of opening up either better gardens and improving their values, or if it increases the site, then they have subdivision opportunities if it gets to a certain size.
So the tree, what we want to do with the tree won't
So
affect that at all?
So the tree is sort of located at the sort of in the middle of the site, where the site starts to open up, widen, and it's so it may or may not impact on how the land could be used in the future.
Okay, right, and back to Member Wilcox.
Yes, Madam Chair, and it's really a comment, and it's about the quality of the report from the commissioners. Where would that go to, or do we need to talk about that regulatory and whatever we're called now, or is that?
Well, the Commissioner is an extremely experienced Reserves Act specialist, been working at DOC and done many reports to the council over the years. So
I'm not. What I'm saying is, Madam Chair, is that, you know, it's the one of the jobs of a commissioner is to ensure that people have heard, that they know that they have been heard, and I don't see that in this report.
I mean, if the IMSB, as a representative of the IMSB, or if the IMSB would like to raise their concerns about the quality of that report, I think you're quite within the rights to do so. So I guess I'm handing back. If that wishes to be raised, do it.
At the Regan.
I think just do it directly. It's probably the...
That's a good
yeah,
pass.
the Department of Conservation will review. The Department of Conservation will review how council has considered the submissions.
Yeah.
So that could be part of that process.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. Right, we've got A and B. I'm going to put that, all those in favour.
Oh, Madam Chair, sorry, just a point of clarity, and for the purposes of surety moving forward, could we please include the species of the tree, which is the kohikoi, the level of kohikoi tree? Because I'm worried that they're going to save a eucalyptus tree on the side of the road and knock the kohikoi over.
Likely to be a camellia or something.
Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you.
Done. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No,
Carried.
No.
Recorded, please.
No.
Record my vote against A, please.
Okay. John, Wayne, John, Mike. Okay. All right.
Always good to be in your company, Mike.
On to item number 16. Thank you. And I'd just like to signal I'm happy to move, and Councillor Clough is happy to second.